Well, have you heard the theory that we're all being bombarded with a cocktail of chemicals from on high? The allegation is that those white vapour trails in the sky left by aircraft are evidence of a government weather modification cover-up, and in the process we're all being slowly poisoned. So is this a baseless conspiracy theory or something sinister that we should be taking seriously? Joining us live from California is one of the most well-known advocates of what is loosely called the Chemtrails theory, Dan Wigington, and to challenge him from Australian Skeptics, Ken McLeod, a retired air traffic controller. Morning to you both. Dane, I'll start with you. What proof do you have that chemtrails are happening and that they are for climate engineering?
First, I would start with the fact that we at geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest website in the world on the subject, don't recognize the chemtrails term. Semantics is important because if people search that term, they find conspiracy theory and hoax by design. So we advise sticking to the climate science terms: climate engineering, geoengineering, solar radiation management. In regard to the proof we have, in addition to having government documents, Senate documents, presidential documents, we have U.S. Air Force former generals, 2 former generals communicating with us. We have NASA satellite imagery like that, which you're showing right now, that clearly no one needs to know anything about meteorology to see that there's very unnatural patterns in those cloud formations, in fact, patterns that nature cannot make. In addition to our testing of precipitation from around the globe, which has yielded without exception the climate engineering components in the precipitation: aluminum, barium, strontium, polymer fibers. We have just at great expense and great effort completed atmospheric testing using a flying laboratory that NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also uses, and we have just confirmed the same climate engineering elements that were emitted from aircraft in a layer that we flew through. We have just confirmed this, first type of its test ever. This is a court admissible type of evidence. I could go on, but the bottom line, in addition to all this, we have film footage of these aircraft at altitude turning on and off. You can't turn condensation on and off with the nozzles visible. As you see in that particular image you're showing now, you can see the nozzles on the wings. We have up-close photographs as well. If people don't believe what they see with their own eyes, I think there's not much we can show them.
Well, Dan, just sort of pulling back from that really sort of specific detail, why a good test of any sort of theory goes back to Cicero. Who benefits? Why would the government be using aeroplanes to poison its own population or change the climate? It seems like a very convoluted and inefficient way, for one thing, of doing anything. And why would they want to do it anyway and then cover it up?
First, in regard to your stated objective of poisoning the population, you said that, I didn't.
Okay.
That's not what we have stated at geoengineeringwatch.org. In regard to engineering the climate, I'll answer in their words. Militaries around the globe, starting with the U.S. military, state emphatically and on the record that the greatest national security threat of all is the climate collapse. What we face is far worse than global warming. We face what's more scientifically termed an abrupt climate collapse. The stated scientific purpose, and by the way, we have every science institution, every climate science institution around the globe discussing exactly what we see in our skies as something that needs to be done immediately to spray light scattering particles into the sky to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. So this is the stated purpose of solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement, to spray light blocking particles into the sky. And in fact, that's what got me into this issue. I have a background in solar energy. I formerly worked for Bechtel Power, the world's largest engineering firm. I have a fully off-grid home that was on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine, and I was losing extraordinary amounts of my solar power uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting. And clearly, condensation cannot block that much of the sun. So we knew there was a problem. We began testing, and we were astounded at the amount of data that was available that official sources were not discussing. And by the way, they're not discussing it because in one case, we have a federal gag order, an illegal federal gag order in the U.S., gagging all the nation's weathermen. I think we should ask ourselves why that's going on.
All right. Well, Ken McLeod from Australian Skeptics, I'll bring you in here. You're a retired air traffic controller. What do you make of these theories?
Well, like in any conspiracy theory, a good one, there is just a germ of truth. And climate climate change, global warming, is a real threat to our civilisation. Scientists have been discussing climate modification using aerosols and so on in the upper atmosphere. But unfortunately, conspiracy theories have latched onto this and gone further. There is no evidence that anyone is actually spraying chemicals in the atmosphere to alter the world's climate. Now, those video clips we saw were a phenomenon called aerodynamic condensation. Now, at low levels and high humidity, where there is a drop of atmospheric pressure, like over the wings or from wingtip vortices, there is a drop in temperature, and that will cause condensation. And it's very commonly seen around airports on rainy days. The chemtrails that people are talking about are the condensation trails from engine exhaust. Now, this is where we have to go back to basic high school science. If you burn a hydrocarbon, the products are carbon dioxide and water. And there's the little chemical formula there, and you'll notice that for every molecule of jet fuel, which is actually kerosene, you will get a molecule of water. So 1 tonne of jet fuel will produce roughly 1 tonne of water. Now, I've done some checking, and over the United States in any one day, about 230,000 tonnes of water are produced in engine exhaust trails. Now, that's where you get this huge mosaic of what appear to be contrails. They're actually technically defined by the World Meteorological Organization as cirrus clouds. And the persistence can vary from a few seconds to 20, 30 minutes. And that depends on the temperature and the humidity of that environment. Now, in the United States, where you have a mosaic of aircraft routes, you will get that crisscross pattern. In Australia, not so much, because mainly our busy air routes are north to south. And not only that, you won't see many of them over the major cities, because by that time the aircraft are on climb or descent, and so they're below the freezing level for condensation trails.
Ken, I'll just interrupt you, because that all sounds very plausible, doesn't it, Dane? Doesn't that make more sense than the government secretly trying to control climate change, which surely, if they'd found a way to do that, they'd be shouting from the rooftops and indeed the stratosphere?
Would they be shouting from the rooftops when we have federal gag orders and confidentiality agreements that are spoken about by the U.S. Air Force generals that we have interviewed on film and on the record? They are not at liberty to speak out about this. The liability issues are incomprehensible. The moment governments around the globe, it's not just U.S. governments around the globe, we have Senate documents 800 pages long to prove this. The moment they've intervened in climate systems, at that point the liability issue becomes immeasurable, incalculable, because every climate cataclysm becomes suspect.
But I guess
let's cut to the chase on. If I can answer a question about the condensation trail aspect first, because this is very important in response to Ken. Ken, are you familiar with a high bypass turbofan jet engine? Are you familiar that that is the standard fitted engine on all commercial carriers and all military tankers? That engine is a jet-powered fan. 80 to 90% of the air that passes through that engine is non-combusted. By design, that engine is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail. In regard to the on-off sequences we see, the atmosphere is layered horizontally, not vertically. So this excuse that this is just some vertically layered humid conditions is ridiculous. We see researchers in the Arctic with their breath condensing. Do we see them standing around for a half hour with a big cloud hanging over their head? That's not how condensation works. Again, everything we see in the sky is exactly what is described by climate scientists. We're not asking anybody to believe us. We're asking them to look at the photographs of nozzles, film footage, government documents, statements from former military, and when we consider the degree of danger of climate collapse, would we really expect governments around the globe to ask our permission before deploying these programs, which happened in 1945, by the way, and the B-17 bombers were part of this program. We have film footage of them turning on and off too.
Well, Ken, can I ask, what are these planes if they aren't geoengineering planes?
Well, the condensation trails we see are just normal public transport aircraft. I've done some checking. At any time over the US, there's about 1,000 jet aircraft airborne. And I can give you some figures on how much water they pump out. An Airbus A330 creates about 7 tonnes of water an hour, a Boeing 787 5.5 tonnes an hour, an Airbus A380 over 13 tonnes an hour. Now, Dane asked right at the start of his little talk, am I familiar with the high bypass turbojet engine? Of course I am. It's the standard engine that's been around since the 60s. But to say that they create less condensation trail is just not true. In actual fact, they create more of a condensation from the burnt fuel for several reasons. One is that the turbulence assists the condensation, and the other reason is these engines are generally bigger, so they burn more fuel and create more water. Now, strangely enough, I've got here an excerpt from the United States Air Service newsletter from 1921, where they wrote an article about the first observed condensation trail, an aircraft operating at 26,000 feet. And this was a complete mystery to everyone at the time because it had not been noted before. And the article goes into, well, what could be causing this? Is it carbon particles from the fuel and that sort of thing? Condensation trails are not new, and you saw that clip earlier of the B-17s operating over Germany with the Mustangs above them. At the time, pilots used to be given as part of their pre-flight briefing the expected condensation level, and it's generally around 26,000 feet. So the trick for the bombers was to operate just below the condensation level so that they could see the Messerschmitts coming in. This is nothing new. Condensation trails have been around for a long time. They're very well understood.
Can I respond to Ken?
It's
Well, I think we're out of
we
time,
are running out
Dane,
of time,
sorry.
but Dane, I am going to let people know to find out more about Dane's case, head to geoengineeringwatch.org. Dane and Ken, thank you so much for joining us and putting your cases.